Hello, my name is Lauren Frederick, and I'll be presenting the research article, A Novel Pulse-Modulated Closed-Loop Artificial Pancreas Based on Intravenous Administration of Insulin and Glucagon, written by Goad, Snells, Burgess, Bernards, and Wider. Today I'm presenting a new approach to artificial pancreas technology, one that directly addresses the limitations of current glucose control systems for people with diabetes. While automated systems have come a long way, they're still not fully hands-off. Users often have to intervene to prevent unstable blood sugar levels. One big problem is subcutaneous insulin delivery. It's slow, unpredictable, and very different from how the body naturally works. In this work, we look at a device that uses standard off-the-shelf electronics to simulate direct intravenous delivery of insulin and glucagon in discrete pulses, closely mimicking the healthy pancreas. This approach holds potential for more stable glucose control, reducing user burden and better protecting against hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. Let's first understand the problem a little deeper. Glucose metabolism isn't a one-size-fits-all. It varies tremendously between individuals. Subcutaneous insulin delivery, which most current systems use, introduces additional delays and unpredictability, making it very hard to automate glucose control fully. In a healthy person, blood glucose is kept very tightly within a range of about 4.5 to 5.5 millimoles per liter. While several mathematical models, like the minimal model, help explain glucose-insulin interactions, they don't fully capture the rapid, dynamic behavior of the real pancreas, especially during meals. One overlooked but crucial factor is the gastrointestinal glucose input. That's how quickly and variably glucose appears in the blood after eating. Transport delays, from insulin absorption to hormone action, complicate efforts to design an artificial pancreas that truly works like nature intended. Here is a brief historical overview from the article. Artificial pancreas research isn't new. In the 1960s and 70s, early devices attempted intravenous delivery of insulin and glucose, but they were bulky and impractical. Today's systems are much sleeker, using continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps. However, they're still not fully automated. Users must announce meals or adjust for unexpected glucose excursions. Adding glucagon delivery into the mix, to raise blood sugar when it dips too low, has improved safety and flexibility. Thanks to advances in sensor technology and miniaturized pumps, the dream of a practical, closed-loop artificial pancreas is closer, but still challenged by timing delays and variability. This image shows a control system diagram representing glucose homeostasis in the endocrine system. It shows how the pancreas maintains blood glucose levels through two opposing hormonal feedback loops. So when we start with our mixed meal input, this will enter the gastrointestinal tract, which introduces glucose into the blood compartment. There are two comparator systems. Comparator 1 compares glucose level to a reference value and activates glucagon control when glucose is below the reference. Comparator 2 compares glucose level to the same reference value and activates insulin control when glucose is above the reference. Glucagon control from alpha cells here is activated when blood glucose is too low, releases glucagon to increase glucose levels. Insulin control from beta cells here is activated when blood glucose is too high, releases insulin to decrease glucose levels. The blood compartment here is where glucose concentration is measured and where hormones act. And then the delays, dead time, is representing the physiological lag between hormone release and measured effects on blood glucose. Subcutaneous insulin infusion remains the standard method for most systems today, but it's far from perfect. The key issue? Time delays. Insulin injected into the skin can take 30 minutes to hours to take full effect, not ideal for dynamic glucose control. Furthermore, the healthy pancreas doesn't release insulin continuously. It sends out hormone bursts every 5 to 7 minutes, responding dynamically to blood glucose levels. A continuous or delayed approach simply doesn't capture the rhythm, leaving patients vulnerable to swings in blood sugar. This image represents a simplified model of how the body and an artificial insulin pump system work together to regulate blood glucose concentration, particularly after a meal. It illustrates how food intake affects glucose levels and how insulin is administered to keep glucose in balance, mimicking the natural role of the endocrine system. So again, we're going to start with the mixed meal input here. That goes to the gastrointestinal tract Food enters the digestive system, where carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. Glucose is absorbed into the blood compartment, increasing blood glucose concentration. The glucose monitor detects the level of glucose in the blood and sends this data to the insulin pump controller. The insulin pump controller decides how much insulin is released based on the monitored glucose level. It sends insulin into the subcutaneous insulin compartment under the skin. This compartment holds and gradually absorbs insulin into the blood, helping reduce the glucose level. This mimics how natural insulin from the pancreas works. This feedback loop, as insulin lowers the glucose level, the glucose monitor detects this change. The insulin input pump adjusts its output in response, maintaining stable glucose levels. High glucose, insulin release, glucose levels drop. This is controlled by sensors and a pump instead of natural beta cells in the pancreas. To better understand and model post-meal glucose dynamics, they used an electrical analogy, specifically a resistor-capacitor or RC circuit model. This model simulates how glucose appears in the bloodstream after eating, reflecting the natural charging and discharging behavior of blood glucose. By using simple electrical stimulation tools like symmetrics, we can predict glucose responses to meals more accurately. This model informs how and when they deliver insulin pulses, allowing the system to respond appropriately to real-world eating behavior without relying on complex meal announcements. This image up here shows how insulin affects blood glucose concentration over time, using an electrical circuit analogy to model the biological insulin-glucose dynamics. So the circuit uses resistors, which are R, uses capacitors, which are C, and transistors, which are the Q1 right here, to stimulate how glucose concentration, U1, and subcutaneous insulin levels, U2, interact. So we also can look at that at the graphical simulation down here. This is time versus concentration. The green line is U1, so again, similar to right here. It shows glucose concentration rising after a meal, then gradually falling as insulin takes effect. This peaks early, around 4 seconds, and then declines due to insulin action. The red line, which is U2 down here, similar to right here, shows insulin release profile, how it's slowly absorbed after injection. Starts increasing slightly after 0 seconds and plateaus, reflecting a slow and steady absorption, which mimics subcutaneous delivery. This model simulates a real-life simulation. So what happens when we shift to intravenous delivery? Using repeated microboluses, which are small, rapid pulses of insulin, directly into the bloodstream, we can control glucose levels far more effectively than with a single large dose. This pulsatile method allows for more natural glucose decay, faster responses, and reduced risk of overshooting into hypoglycemia. It's also simpler and more predictable than trying to model the entire glucose-insulin dynamic ahead of time. The graphs demonstrate how blood glucose concentration responds to insulin administration under different conditions. In our top graph here, blood glucose concentration, which is our green line, rises to about 12 millimoles per liter initially. At around 5 seconds, a single insulin bolus, here labeled UC2, red, is administered. 3 different curves show the glucose clearance rates with varying R3 parameter values. So you can see R3 here. Higher R3 values result in less efficient glucose clearance, which is the purple line. In the bottom graph, similar initial glucose rise to about 12 millimoles per liter. Instead of a single bolus like here, they have 12 insulin pulses that are administered. The same 3 R3 parameter variations are tested. The pulsatile insulin delivery creates a stepwise reduction in blood glucose levels. These simulations illustrate a key aspect of the endocrine system, how insulin sensitivity affects glucose metabolism. The graphs demonstrate that the same insulin dose produces different glucose clearance rates depending on insulin sensitivity, which is clinically relevant for understanding the insulin resistance in diabetes management. This leads us to the core of the new method, discrete time pulse-modulated glucose control. Instead of continuously infusing insulin or glucagon, the system gives small, calculated doses every 5 minutes, based on the most recent blood glucose reading. It's a responsive, feedback-based method, mirroring the healthy pancreas's natural rhythms. No complex predictive modeling, no needing to announce meals, just real-time adjustment based on what's actually happening in the body, keeping blood glucose stable through measured, frequent, minimal interventions. This image shows a control system diagram of glucose regulation in the body via the endocrine system. It illustrates the feedback mechanisms that maintain blood glucose homeostasis after a mixed meal input. So again, in our diagram, we start with our mixed meal input, going to the gastrointestinal tract, to the blood compartment, and again, the delays and dead time that happens in a natural body, to our reference here. The comparison mechanism compares current glucose concentration, which is GC, with a reference level. The upper pathway is when the glucose concentration is less than the reference level, and glucagon is released in pulses through a pump. The lower pathway here is when glucose concentration is greater than the reference level, and insulin is released in pulses through a pump. The blood compartment, again, is where glucose is measured. A summation point here is where hormone effects and meal input influence blood glucose. The diagram effectively represents the counter-regulatory hormone systems, where insulin decreases blood glucose levels when they're too high, and glucagon increases blood glucose when levels are too low. It's a classic engineering style representation of the endocrine feedback system that maintains glucose homeostasis. When they put this system into simulation, the results were promising. The block diagram shows how the system loops glucose measurements into small insulin or glucagon pulses, spaced carefully to allow natural pharmacokinetic effects to overlap and stabilize blood sugar. Instead of chasing highs or lows with aggressive corrections, the system uses many small nudges to maintain glucose right around the target of 5 millimoles per liter. This demonstrates a key point. Stability doesn't have to come from brute force modeling. It can come from mimicking nature's timing and subtlety. This image shows a closed-loop control system that mimics endocrine system regulation of blood glucose concentration, much like how the pancreas naturally manages glucose levels through the hormones insulin and glucagon. So we have our glucose sensor here, monitors blood glucose concentration in real time, sends the data to the glucose concentration controller, all the way over here. This compares the actual blood glucose level with a reference level, which was our 5 millimoles per liter. Every 5 minutes, it uses a timing pulse to assess whether insulin or glucagon is needed. That will then send signals to either the insulin pulse shaper or the glucagon pulse shaper based on the deviation from the desired glucose level. The pulse shapers shape and modulate the signal to determine the strength and duration of hormone release. This sends instructions to the corresponding insulin or glucagon pump, which then deliver insulin which lowers blood glucose, or glucagon, which raises blood glucose, into the blood glucose compartments. These actions adjust the blood glucose concentration accordingly. In this feedback loop, the glucose sensor continuously monitors the effect of insulin and glucagon administration. It feeds updated glucose levels back to the controller to repeat the regulation cycle. In summary, this work represents a shift in how we approach artificial pancreas design. By observing actual glucose dynamics and translating them into simple, reliable electrical models, we've created a control system that behaves more like a biological pancreas. It challenges the heavy reliance on predictive modeling and highlights the limitations of subcutaneous insulin delivery. There's still work to be done, particularly to translate the simulation into a portable, practical device, but the path forward is clear. Simpler, more natural, pulse-driven glucose control. And here is the reference for the article that I reviewed for my presentation. Thank you.